I feel like people feel that they're fighting against their brain. They're breaking down their mind. They're trying to push forward and they just feel stuck. I feel like so many people listening right now feel stuck in their job. They feel stuck in a bad relationship. They feel stuck looking for a career. If someone feels stuck, what do they need to understand about the brain in order to start the process to get unstuck?
Yeah. So I think that feeling of being stuck, it's really quite natural when you think about neuroscience and your biology. The brain loves to keep you in what is safe and normal to you. The brain is also, I like to call it a prediction machine. So we don't necessarily experience reality. We experience, our brain sort of filtering everything we see, hear, feel, touch, but also predicting what's about to happen. And that's why a lot of times, we feel like anxious or whatever it is. It has to do with the brain's predicting kind of something that's upcoming. And so I think that feeling of being stuck is quite normal and natural. And I just want to say that first, but also understanding which area you're stuck in, right? And I'm going to take it an interesting direction right now, but I like to talk about procrastination because it's a good example of feeling stuck, right? So if let's say you have a goal and you're like starting a podcast and you're like, okay, I want to do it. And then you're procrastinating it, right? So I always say that there are 3 reasons why people procrastinate. And the first reason is there's an identity sort of mismatch. And what I mean by that is that your sense of self and who you believe that you are doesn't match with you working toward the goal of launching a podcast. And this actually kind of resonated with me personally whenever I was starting to write a book. I was procrastinating writing my book and I was like, why am I doing this? I know it's a goal. I know I want to do it, but I don't know why I'm procrastinating. And the default mode network in the brain is really what's at play here. So the default mode network is really appropriately named because it kind of helps to regulate and propel our default mode of behavior, right? So it's responsible for our default mode of being and doing. But it's also responsible for our sense of self and constructing the narrative or the story of our lives. And so if your sense of self doesn't match, if your identity doesn't match whatever it is that you're trying to do, then your default mode network is not really going to be helping you do the behaviors or take the action toward starting a podcast. And so I always tell my clients, I tell my students, I tell everyone on social media, I'm like, just identity shift, shift your identity. You can just start to identify as the version of you who has done the thing. And so that's kind of the first part of that. And then the second.
Let's talk about that first one. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. And I love the way you broke down the default mode network because this identity mismatch that you're talking about, are you saying that if you don't, I know you've said something which I love. You said science says you have to act like you already have it before something can happen. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying? That you've got to feel like I'm already an author, I'm already a podcaster? How does someone practically apply that identity to make sure it's aligned?
Right. So it's really just choosing to identify as that person, right? And so when I say that, you have to act like you already have it or you already are it in order to do it or be it. It works the same way. The analogy I use there is falling asleep at night. Like when you fall asleep at night, you lay down, you close your eyes, you slow your breath, and you pretend like you're asleep until you fall asleep and your brain makes it so. And life works that way as well. And you have to act like it and move like it, right? Like you're not going to become a drummer in a band unless you act like a drummer, and drummers practice. And so it's sort of like, and so how do I apply that like practically? I guess from my book example, I really just decided I'm an author. Like from this moment forward, I'm an author. And I think a lot of times we don't realize the power that we have to choose those sorts of things. And this is another reason why I tell people to be so careful about the labels that they use to identify themselves and the labels that they put on themselves. And growing up in my own life, I had so many different labels put onto me that I believed and just kind of allowed to describe who I was. And that impacted my life. It impacted my health. It impacted everything in my world. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it. But yeah, and so applying that practically, a lot of times it really just looks like choosing to identify as that version of you. Like if I'm trying to start a podcast, I am a podcaster. And there I am doing it, right?
And it's almost like, how does an author behave? And let me start practicing that now. So an author gets up and writes a page even when they don't feel inspired, because that's how they get, for example,
Right.
or like a podcaster sits down and you just start interviewing the people that are available until you're able to book the guests that you really want to speak to.
Right, exactly. And when that happens, when you write what happens then is that you're writing a new story, and your brain kind of stops using your past to predict your future, and it kind of starts to take the present moment and your new identity that you are choosing to help predict your future behavior. And so it's super powerful.
I love that. All right, what's the second? That was great.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the second reason why most people procrastinate is fear. A lot of times we are actually subconsciously afraid of success. And I think this is a big reason why a lot of people stay stuck, is that we are actually subconsciously afraid of what it might look like if we succeed at doing it.
Interesting.
And for me personally, so I'm actually about to launch a podcast. By the time this episode comes out, it may or may not be already launched, but when I was procrastinating filming my podcast, and me being me, I sit down and I analyze my mind. Like, why am I procrastinating starting to film this podcast? And what I found was that I was subconsciously afraid of being seen in sort of a more vulnerable way, because long form content is a lot more vulnerable than a 1-minute reel on Instagram. Like, you're not really you in that short of a period of time. But in long form content, people can really see you. And so that was sort of the fear that I uncovered for myself. But yeah, and I think this is another reason why I tell people all the time, like a lot of people say, get specific about your goals. But I also say, get specific about your fears, because your fears, they can have control over you when you don't know what they are. But when you identify them, labeling them, well, that activates the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, they sort of have this kind of seesaw relationship where when one activity in one goes up, activity in the other goes down. And so when you label your emotions, you label the fears that you have, you're actually giving yourself your power back. You're activating the prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO of your brain. It's sort of the boss of your brain. And so kind of getting specific about your fears, I would say, is the way to overcome that version of stuckness. And I think that's a really powerful activity to do if somebody were feeling stuck.
How did you get so specific and define your own fear? I love that you shared what you were worried about and this whole idea that people are scared of success.
Yeah.
How did you come upon that? Like, what process did it take? What reflection did you do? How did you identify them? I love what you said about identifying your goals is important, but actually knowing your fears is equally as important, if not more. How do you do that?
Yeah. So I think for me, I have this saying called take it all the way to the end. And so allow yourself to go on the journey or the path all the way to the end. And so I sat down and I was like, okay, if I go and I film this podcast, my goal is to have a top podcast in the world, right? So if I'm having a top podcast in the world, what might that look like? Oh, that means that I'm setting myself up to be seen more and maybe have more hate and maybe have more criticism and judgment and all that. And just seeing myself write that down, I was like, okay, well, if my brain is highlighting that as, oh, if you go and start a podcast, you're going to have more hate and face more criticism, then it might try to keep me safe from that. And that's really what that is your brain is just trying to keep you safe. And so that's why identifying your fears can be so powerful. And so, yeah, I would say if you're trying to identify what your fears are, I would just take the goal, whatever it is that you're trying to do, all the way to the end. Like if it's the top podcast or if it's the best-selling book or if it's your business or even a relationship, right? Like a lot of people in relationships, like you're afraid of relying on someone or being dependent on someone or really fully being open and vulnerable with someone. And honestly, just identifying that as the first step and getting super clear on that, because when you get clear on that, then you can rewrite the story of exactly like you said. Yes, it's true, being more vulnerable and being seen might equal more judgment or criticism, but it might also equal, and to the same extent, if not more love and more support. So, and you have to identify it first to give yourself the chance to even rewrite that fear.
Yeah, I love the idea of take it all the way to the end. That's a great one. It's a great way of actually getting really clear on exactly what's tripping you up. And I love what you just said there, that actually when you come up with it, you realize your brain was just trying to keep you safe.
Yeah.
It was actually just trying to help you because it was scared of that. It wasn't that you weren't good enough, or it wasn't that you weren't smart enough, or it wasn't that you can't develop the skills. It was just trying to keep you safe.
Yeah. And I think when we think about our brain trying to keep us safe, that's a really big reason why the brain tries to keep us kind of in our comfort zone, right? But it's super important to recognize and acknowledge that any sort of growth happens outside of our comfort zones. Like I would not be in the position where I am today if I didn't take delusional level risks and leaps of faith. And so it's really a requirement to achieving or receiving or having whatever it is that we want. And so, yeah, getting really clear on our fears and taking it all the way, I take it all the way to the end applies to that. It also applies to limiting beliefs as well. Like take it all the way to the end, see what comes up for you. And also, yeah, I think because I've had students, I had a specific student ask me, she was struggling with sand volleyball, beach volleyball. And she was like, I had this fear. And I was like, take it all the way to the end. Visualize it maybe. You know, I don't think I've ever heard anyone tell people like, visualize your fears. But if it's safe for you and you're not going to like have any sort of physical reaction, like visualize it and see what comes up for you and see like, what is it really that you're afraid of? And then you can give yourself the chance to kind of rewrite that story.
Yeah. What's number 3?
Okay, so there's an identity mismatch, or there's maybe some underlying fear behind it. And then number 3 is really more of a scientific kind of simple, straightforward thing, and it's cheap dopamine. It's everywhere. And society it's everywhere. Cheap dopamine, social media, it's all over the place. And like fast food, binging, Netflix, whatever it is. That's number 3 is cheap dopamine. And it's a dream. Dopamine, I always say like dopamine doesn't care about your dreams. Dopamine just cares about what you automate and what you repeat. And so it's going to keep you doing that. And also, when it comes to cheap dopamine, if you're giving yourself a lot of that, then you're not really, and one of the big things that I do to help kind of motivate myself to doing things is withholding reward. And so whenever I was in the PhD, I studied drug addiction. And so a lot of dopamine research and studying kind of the dopamine pathways, but also drug addiction is really just maladaptive habit formation. And so when I think about kind of cheap dopamine and habit formation and behavior, because dopamine drives a lot of behavior, one of the things that I do to kind of motivate myself is just withhold whatever reward that I'm wanting. So let's say I saw it online or I was shopping or whatever and I saw a shirt that I wanted, I wouldn't allow myself to buy it, or a candle or whatever it is. I wouldn't allow myself to buy it until after I do the task that I'm maybe procrastinating or feeling stuck doing. And so if someone's out there right now and you're procrastinating or feeling stuck, starting a business or going after a job or dating in a relationship or whatever it is, and you're regularly giving yourself sort of cheap dopamine, or, you know, allowing yourself to just like have whatever reward it is, and you just give it to yourself all the time, then you're not really setting yourself up for success, because you're giving yourself, your brain is just it's well fed on dopamine. And you can think of it sort of as the analogy of like snacking all day, right? So if you're snacking all day, you're never really going to be hungry and to eat that whole meal. And so dopamine's kind of the same way. If you're like giving yourself those cheap dopamine hits, going on social media all day long, then you're never really going to be driven to go complete that big task. And that big task is going to be a lot more rewarding than the small, repetitive, cheap dopamine, especially at night. So I want to highlight that, because this is something newer that I've been talking about. And honestly, I discover all of this, like obviously I learned about neuroscience in school, but I discover a lot of the kind of hacks and stuff based on what I need and in my own life. And so I realized, you know, I was waking up with less motivation, waking up low on energy, and just not really feeling like normally. And I have most of the time, I really do wake up and I jump out of bed and I'm like ready and so excited for the day. So I'm like, what's happening here? And what I actually realized was that so dopamine actually resets itself and restores as you sleep. And so scrolling at nighttime or binge watching Netflix or any of those things that give you cheap dopamine, and even eating late night snacks and all that, that actually, well, one, it disrupts your sleep and that keeps your dopamine system from restoring itself, but also it desensitizes your dopamine receptors. So when you wake up in the morning, you're, for lack of a better, like to keep it simple, you're less sensitive to dopamine when you wake up in the morning, when you give yourself cheap dopamine at night. And so Cheap dopamine is number 3. It's a big reason why people stay stuck. Yeah, because if you're giving yourself snacks all day, you're never going to be driven to cook a meal. If you're giving yourself cheap dopamine all day long, you're never going to be driven to go do the big task that's going to help you get closer to your dreams.